welcome to the SOMA Modern Podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Rhee Norgo joining us from SYPartners. She is the venture partner and founder of SYPartners, Mina. Welcome, Rhee, and thank you very much for being on the podcast. I'd really like if you could share with our guests a little bit about yourself, your background, and then we can talk a little bit about the interesting things we're doing together.
Sure. Thank you for having me, first of all. It's a pleasure. My background is in design. I'm trained as a designer. I've worked in that capacity throughout my career in very varied interdisciplinary environments. And that's what leads me here to a position as venture partner, which means out there exploring new things, creating new partnerships, finding ways of solving problems that require innovative or wholly new solutions through multi-stakeholder partnerships. And I'm also the founder of this particular office of SYPartners, a consulting firm.
And tell me a little bit about your background. It's interesting. We've shared some thoughts, but I know it's quite particular.
Yeah. So I'm from Denmark, and Denmark has a very strong, I think, and clear history of design and the importance of design, in particular when it comes to public space. And furniture design is where I think people in throughout the world understand Danish design and aesthetics. And for me, being from Denmark and being steeped in a very aware, design-aware society, let's say, but also tradition of makers, is not so much about blonde wood as it is about a sense of the importance of design and what design can do for individuals and for society.
Yeah. I see you actually studied nature-based rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you might share a little bit about what that means.
Yeah. So that's my current studies. I went back to school. I think it's really important to re-engage in learning at various stages in life. But this really came, or this particular part of my design education I started during COVID, when I realized and I saw that most everything we do inside, we can do outside. And people did in fact go outside, and we had meetings and gatherings and that led me to find this school and this particular degree at the University of Copenhagen, which in English translates to nature-based rehabilitation and health promotion, I would say. So that nature-based rehabilitation and health promotion is an interdisciplinary study between the field of landscape design and therapeutic practices. Yeah. And there is a research center connected to this program in school in Copenhagen that studies the interplay between the design of natural environments or certain nature-based environments and the types of therapies that you could have. This particular center studies different kinds of stress and the role of therapy and nature-based therapy in that.
So I have a few points I want to touch on there.
Sure.
But why did you get into that? What drew you to that further study?
Yeah. Well, as I said, there was this spark and this realization that what we can do outside is, well, that what we do inside normally as people we can do outside, but also that the environment changes how we relate and how we relate to the world around us. So my deep, where I come from is the realization that it's very hard to care about something you don't know something about, right?
Yes.
And that's true of experience, and it's true in design. Direct experience is very important, right? We try not to delegate understanding when we don't have to. And the same is true of a relationship with nature, or feeling yourself or realizing yourself as a person as being nature. If we're not in nature, if we don't have that experience, it's very hard to care deeply, and it's very hard to sustain a practice of design and of caring about our environment, about ourselves now and in the future. So that's where I come from, and that's where my interest lies.
And that's what I wanted, because I resonate with that heavily. I mean, SOMA Modern was also born about being in natural systems, being in the environment, being able to connect the dots between our human lives and nature, which we rely on for a lot of food or otherwise our economy. And any opportunity. It's also why we have the office, trying to get to low-rise buildings where we can access gardens. Just the practice of being outdoors and more meetings you can do outdoors, the more present you are with the actual thing you're carrying and working towards. So as we're talking about the environment, what are some of the theories that underpin nature-based rehabilitation? You shared with me before, but we haven't talked really about what are the fundamentals or foundations for that.
I mean, there's a study you probably know from the 80s by Ulrich that looks at the speed of recovery of patients post-surgery, looking out a window at a natural environment, at trees, versus not looking at a natural environment. And patients who are able to look at a natural environment recover more quickly, have less need for pain medication, and so on and so forth. So I think that's
what everybody goes to in reference.
Yeah, but it's a pretty powerful study, right? Because it both speaks to, I think, the what it means to be what it means to be a patient. There's an economy associated with the speed of recovery, obviously, for the individual and for society, but also the quality of that time that's spent in recovery, less pain versus more pain. It's quite significant. So that's one study.
There's for me, I always think back to how we're genetically wired, and just our connection to nature is sort of exemplified in that experience, whether it's recovery or simply when you go out for a walk in the woods or nature. There's this kind of deep sigh that always happens with me, where you realize, you're suddenly in an environment that resonates with you biologically. And when we started talking, that was the idea that's always resonating with me. So rehabilitation is taking all those background stressors out, using nature and the environment.
That's why we call it health promotion. Also, what you're experiencing is what we would call soft fascination. So there's another theory by Kaplan and Kaplan, the attention restoration theory, that basically says that the kind of attention that you pay to your environment inside, like where we are now with our desks and chairs and artificial lighting and screens, et cetera,
like we are here right
now, requires a certain kind of attention, and that gets depleted over time. Going in nature, you're able to recharge and have a different kind of attention, which is what we call soft fascination. And that's restorative of your balance as a person, but it's also really helpful creatively, which I'm sure you've experienced as well.
I find now more than ever, I'm looking for an opportunity to get into nature, to completely strip away all of the urban sort of stressors, including background noise, white noise that's generated from industry, if you will, or from traffic. But when you're sitting by white noise generated by water or by the rustling of the trees,
it's completely
or the wind,
different.
It completely undoes a lot of that. And I've seen, from my youth to today, how restorative that is, simply at a baseline. And then when you think about health promotion and being able to support people in rehabilitation, all of a sudden these assets have multiple uses, or call it multiple values for society.
That's right. And that's why it's important to think about this area of study, this discipline, as nature's not a backdrop in this case. It's a co-therapist, you could say, and the less, the more we engage, the less we have to do, which is a little bit counterintuitive to how we think about rehabilitation and therapy and health promotion, as there's a lot of doing, but the fact that is that when you can consider yourself or experience yourself, as you're describing, as being nature, those relationships change quite dramatically on many levels. There's as I know you're aware of too, the chemistry and the chemical interaction of plants to humans, right? Like blood pressure, heart rate goes down by the scent of roses, for example, not just roses. And you don't have to stand in a lavender field to have that exchange. It could be, quite intimate. It doesn't have to be a lot. So it's very powerful in that way.
The one that works for me the most, or the one that I continuously resonate and go back to, is the smell of the soil in the forest.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's, all this work all around nature bathing.
Yes.
And what you're getting in terms of phenols and other chemicals in the air that plants are releasing, and very significant reactions for people. It makes me think about the work that I did here in Abu Dhabi, and our viewers probably realize we're not in the SOMA MATER office. We're actually here at the SYP office in Abu Dhabi. So thanks for hosting us.
Of course.
But there's some beautiful work that's being done in this part of the world, in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, about getting not only the locals, but also everybody who's here back into nature.
Right.
And my work in biodiversity did a lot about getting ecotourism to work. And I feel it's undervalued, because it isn't just tourism, right? Just getting out to those spaces can be very valuable for people that are in very high stress jobs or otherwise. So for anybody who's thinking about tourism, biodiversity and ecotourism, there are probably multiple benefits that, rehabilitation, therapy, health promotion could work with as well. And it makes me think then, first I resonate again with this whole learning. I'm a student for life. But if you're studying, what is it you're specifically studying?
Yeah.
What are you reading these days?
Yeah. So for one, I bring my background in design into this topic, which is really working at the intersection of the different disciplines that can innovate in this space. Yeah. So that's what I bring to it. I'm not a medical doctor, as you know, I think, nor am I a landscape architect, but in my role as a designer, looking at the deep pockets of knowledge that we can bring together to innovate in this space is my focus. So I'm both reading and studying some of the founders and voices in deep ecology from Scandinavia, which I'm sure you're aware of, also Anne Niss and so on and so forth, which is a very fundamental way to look at relationship with nature. And that's very important for me to remember. And I'm actively studying the space between nature, art culture, you could say, and humans, because I've lived in urban environments for most of my life, and maybe in the same way that we ask this question in other ways, you could say that about nature. So if you ask, well, what's a good nature experience? So let's think about tourism or, I would say the one that you are going to have a lot, right?
Yeah.
So that means the one that's close to you.
Yes.
And it could be a single tree, or it could be a view or water, or it could be your balcony. But to dedicate importance and to create importance around that is really important. And then we can think about that from an urban planning perspective also. Within a 20-minute radius, what nature experiences are you able to access? And then beyond that, basically your interaction is going to be something that you may do once a week, once a month. It's not part of your moment to moment experience. So that's why I focus a lot on the role that cultural institutions can have in providing certain kinds of nature culture experiences, right? Many, many cultural institutions, and this have land, have grounds that may be beautiful, but they're also underutilized in terms of service and programs. And that actually accounts for many types of institutions around the world. So that's been a focus of mine, both because in my own experience, and again, I think that's really important, I can relate to that, but also because the relationship between art, nature, culture, the institution, and the individual, right? I think has potential for societal good that is very, very high and pretty underutilized now. So that's one of the things. I mean, I have too many ideas always.
Well,
right?
so are you're writing about this?
Yeah. So my papers, I usually write about some version of that.
And I want to dig a little deeper into that. When you bring up art, you know, when most people are thinking about nature and rehabilitation or health, art doesn't even come anywhere. You know, people are thinking, there's something hanging on a wall, there's a sculpture, but how does art fit into this directly for somebody in an urban space?
Yeah. Well, art in a nature setting, or let's say the grounds or garden of a museum, for example, right, is both exists. I mean, art exists in connection to that. You can go inside, you can go outside. But there's also art outside. And so when art is placed in a natural environment, you have a couple of different processes working at the same time, but you're using this state of soft fascination to relate to both. And that's where I think the interest for me comes. But it's also really about being sustainable in thinking about access. So the spaces that we have already, right, that we have access to, that are close to us, that we've invested in, that exist, how can we use them? How can we use them better? And how can more people have access to these types of experiences? So an example was I wrote or imagined a program for a museum that was offering tours for dementia patients inside the museum. So I imagined a program for caregivers of dementia patients in the garden.
Oh, wow.
And that would be an example of bringing the whole institution into use and really respecting the different experiences that both parties might have.
I also know what being in nature with, whether you're a caregiver or you're with your partner or with your family, what that does. And we've had the pleasure and fortune to be in many places around the world where there's a combination of, you know, either a garden or a wild space and some installation, as well as just the fascination that everybody can interpret. Meanwhile, you're bathing in that, in the environment, so to speak. I'd like to draw a little bit now of that and ask how that relates with your work with SYP.
Yeah. Well, so, you know, I mentioned I have a design background, and I think the one thing about that training is that we practice bringing in multiple points of view at all times, because in a design, from a design perspective, it is needed to manifest any type of innovation, right? So environment plays a huge role in transformation work as well. You're here in our offices. Our environment is particularly made or designed to support different kinds of human interaction, right? For comfort, for inspiration, for flexibility, and so on and so forth. And so we pay a lot of attention to the conditions in an environment that make it possible for us to work together, essentially. And I think, and that is one of the insides. We do what we can here inside, and we do have views. Natural light is a really important part and can play an important part. But once you go outside and connect back together in a really fundamental way, as humans, it's also possible to imagine in a way that we may have barriers to in other environments. So that's the connection. There is the conditions for transformation, whether you talk about it as an individual, as a leadership team, or as a society more broadly, a region, et cetera, et cetera. What are the conditions that we're creating for ourselves to make the change that we want to make?
So that brings me to how we're working together. And when we talk about these changes we're experiencing in the environment, I think about the change in some significant subjects like sustainability, legacy in this part of the world, and longevity. And we wrote a white paper on this. I wanted you to share a little bit about how you and SYP think about these things, because we see a lot of this change in this part of the world fast, but maybe things like legacy need to be cared for and addressed in a new way. So I wanted you to share a little bit about what we're doing there.
Yeah. Because we as SYP, we work with leaders in times of transformation. And that could be changing conditions, the beginning of a new chapter of a career, the ending, or the point where you begin to consider legacy. Legacy is something that's always very present for us. What we find works really well is when you incorporate the idea of legacy into the purpose of an organization. And that could be a family, or it could be a corporation, or it could be a nation or a region. Who were we? Who are we now? Who do we want to be in the future? And I think one of the things that we found, and one of your insights also, were that requires long-term thinking, which is hard for humans, right?
Yeah.
I mean, also in a very fast-moving environment. We're in a very fast-moving culture for good reason. We need transformation to come quickly.
Yeah.
But the choices that we make, and our ability to hold on to a long-term vision, is a discipline that can be honed and that can be supported through processes. And that's what we spend a lot of time on here. So stakeholder alignment, it feels like a very neutral term, but the idea of gathering people around a purpose, around a future that we want to see together so that we can go build it. And then having the rituals and the tools to do that consistently over time. So take a big vision, breaking it down so that we can move at great speed together in a intentional way that gives outcomes along the way too.
And what does that take of an organization or leadership that are trying to tackle that question? Is it, that you have to grind out all the KPIs, or is it, I was told this is what we have to do? What are you as SYP drawing out from these groups that becomes so real for them to make those changes?
Yeah. So you know this very well, of course, that we as humans learn best through stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this has nothing of the content, but stories that we can listen to, that we can share, and that we can see ourselves in, so that we can pass them on, is an important and essential tool. And something that we've found that so many people have exceptional talent and skill and practice, and really appreciate, right? As a culture too. So it's a very positive thing when we think about creating legacy. And legacy is made at every generation. And again, that's at every moment in every generation, right? Legacy is not just the past.
Yeah.
And I think when we listen to let's say incoming generations of leaders, emerging leaders, and again, whether that's families or in corporations, there is this sense of needing to hold on and wanting to hold on to a past that you are maybe not a part of or have access to. And this is where it becomes really important that this work of creating legacy happens in between generations at all stages, right? So that we're writing the story together of who we were, of who we want to become, and you engage in that. And that legacy is not something, it's sort of like an afterthought. I'm like, well, I got to make sure that I deliver whatever I did in a good place for others to take over. That it really is an act of co-creation throughout life.
There's something that comes up in my mind about our part of the world here in the Middle East. We're an oral history up until recently, and we're also very much the storytellers. I come from a family of very heavy storytellers. And
you tell a good story.
Yeah, I'm by no means the best in my family. I know exactly who that is.
I wouldn't know, but...
it's fun. I like that you're describing that storytelling as being a two-party experience, generation to generation, and that it's not just the past being brought forward and told. And I think that's important because in this part of the world, as we're moving so fast, there is this, respecting your elders and them telling the stories. I think storytelling also comes as a sort of question-answer experience.
Absolutely.
It isn't just a monologue.
No, that's true.
I often think about when I sit with my grandmother in
Right.
Sharjah and, I ask her, what did you guys eat when you were
Right.
my age? And she said, it wasn't the fried chicken.
Not as much as you do.
Not as much, exactly.
That's what she said.
So when we talk about that experience, I assume it's also fraught with tension or concern, keeping up persona, especially when you're in a corporate setting, maybe how leadership is perceived, how vulnerability is perceived. I know there's an art to being able to manage a room and to curate a conversation for people, or a space for people where a conversation can happen. Would you share maybe some of the more exciting moments? I mean, we don't maybe have the details, but
Right.
where you feel when you're in a room and you can feel it click.
Yeah. The personal is really always it,
Okay.
right? So create the conditions for anyone, really, but we work with leaders a lot to share a vision and a purpose, and to allow others in to do it together and to make it together. So it's the act of making something your story also, and making it together, that it makes it stick, as it were, but that makes it that way of working sustainable over time and very powerful, actually. So so those moments are, you can feel it when there is trust enough in the room to begin to explore topics that are maybe difficult, that may have no apparent or immediate solution, but there's a trust in an environment to solve together, right? And a belief that you can solve together. That's how we know. And because our work, you talked about KPIs before, and setting goals and achieving goals, very important, obviously, for transformation. But for us, I think we see the work in people also over time, right? So leaders that we work with in one part of their career, in one part of their life, I often see, and it is often, and I am very grateful and appreciative of that. You'll see that leader work in a way that incorporates some tools, some rituals that we may have created together at a different time in their career. So it's really through the person also, right? Yeah. There's the development of a person, there's the development of a team, and there's a development of an ecosystem. And they have different time scales, and oftentimes the work that we do together will show up over time in the individual, and maybe in work that they do in the future too.
I like this idea that you're looking at the different timelines between the individual, the sort of company culture.
Sure.
There's something to be said about when you're in a room and you hear a personal story from somebody where they're reflecting or they're thinking about their own experience, and how quickly people across the table can identify with this. In this part of the world, this is a very near recent history where somebody might describe how their grandfather used to go hunting with falcons.
Right.
And across the room, there's a handful of people that, for one reason or another, maybe don't get along in the company culture, or are sort of working side by side and have different objectives, that suddenly all the walls are down.
Right.
And those are the common things that drive people.
Yeah.
I think it's easy today, in the speed of how things happen, that there is this large, I don't call it artificial, but it isn't where it's like you were saying, like the environment's in the backdrop. Here, the corporation or the organization is everything, and you're sort of removed as an individual, and you're bringing the individual to the fore, and you realize that's where the power of change is sitting. It's in the people.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's not to say that systems are not important, right? If you think about beliefs, rituals, and tools, that you need to have the ability to change across many dimensions
Yeah.
at the same time, obviously, and having systems that allow us to be the best that we can be
Yeah.
as individuals and together is very important. And to having the tools that help us do that is too. But without a shared belief, a shared
Yeah.
purpose, to your point, it's very hard to get moving together and to create the coalitions and to come together around new solutions and new constellations if you're not looking at the
Yeah.
same thing or connect as people, as humans. So both are important, obviously.
So taking that into account, what in your mind do leaders need to be looking for or maybe have in front of them that they need to tackle as we see all of this change moving so fast today, especially here in the Middle East?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I like to focus on and that we like to focus on is what is already there, right? What we bring, what strengths, what experience we bring as humans that is already there, that is inherent in ourselves and our families and cultures, et cetera, and be very quite humble and open to that. And then build on that. And then imagine how those things that we hold dear, the values that we have, can be really a catalyst for transformation also. So that's really important, to work with what's there, right, in terms of identity and culture, on one hand. On the other hand, one of the topics that we are asked to engage in often is to create the conditions for what we may call coalition building. It sounds so official, but it's really about bringing many parties, a multi-stakeholder engagement environment together to solve very complex problems, right? That no entity, no company, no person can do by themselves. So, and it's hard. It's hard to work together as humans, as you were just saying. As it turns out, even when you have a good shared idea, it's difficult, right? So it is a practice that we take really seriously. We have a lot of experience in is how to support leaders, teams, organizations in creating the conditions for that transformation, and through that, develop cultures that are able to sustain themselves in the future, right? With this idea of stakeholder engagement and a multi-stakeholder engagement environment at the core of that. And so whether that's a local population to an institution to a government, or it's a company and its role with its partners in production, let's say, and what we might call end users, all of these factors play in.
I want to bring it back down to sustainability and legacy. And I wonder, what excites you about this region when we think about sustainability and legacy? Where do you think there's real momentum for us here?
So coming from design, we ask ourselves to look at the ends of a spectrum of usability, for example, right? So it was termed universal design back in the day, inclusive design. You've heard about these frameworks, but it's basically looking at extremes in order to find solutions that work broadly versus looking from the middle and going out.
Interesting.
And the Middle East is certainly a place of extremes when it comes to climate and finding solutions for sustainable life in the future, whether you're talking water or food production or managing to live in an extreme climate, right? So, but that is the source of innovation also, right? That could be very helpful and instructive for people all over the world. So I'm excited about that, right? So that's a very, take the constraint, take the challenge. In terms of designing a future, I'm using design in the broadest sense of the word, right? And to really innovate where innovation is needed.
So I like that, because that's where we come from as SOMA Modern. We believe we have in our environment, in the way we're trying to create a sustainable food system, a story and a learning that can become our legacy into the rest of the world. But I'd flip this one back at you and say, if that's what we have in the environment, could we get the same extreme learning in the leadership, the policymakers, right? I feel that those two things need to be in sync. And I wonder if there's work that we could do about bringing... You see, I think the challenge we've seen is there's always somewhere else might know better.
Sure.
And the longer we do our work in the sustainability and the food space, the more obvious it is that our history and our stories in the extreme, you know, when I speak to my grandmother, I go, well, hold on. The answers are in our backyard. Can we take this to the world? I wonder how you would tackle that challenge. And I'd love to hear, you know, your thinking around that.
I think you're right to connect the environmental aspect to maybe leadership more broadly also. I think that's a great, it's always really good to look at adjacencies and see what can inspire us and what do we share, not, you know, what, so that we can bring in the best solutions. And I think this idea of leaping or leapfrogging, right?
Yes.
Like that change can happen very quickly. That experience exists in people here in the region. And we're going to need to rely on not just that belief, but the ability to create change quite quickly, right? So I think that's another aspect on one hand. And on the other hand, there's an emphasis on families, the role of families as a integral part to creating that change or that transformation. And that's, I think, again, it's less about a static sense of being, but respecting history, many generations at the same time in order to find a path forward that works for the entire society. So I do see the connection that you're making there. Do we need to do more there? And can we inspire more? I think we can. And that's maybe a job ahead for us.
Well, then that makes me think about how we together are actually co-writing those things on change, sustainability, and legacy. And this podcast is probably part of that conversation as well. I think the takeaway for me today is I've come from a family where at one point we had 4 generations or 5 generations all living at the same time in one family across time. And I think there is an opportunity that we have here to make sure those stories pass through and are co-written. And I think that's why we enjoy working so much with you and with SYP. So here's to more writing together and to more creating. And I hope we can capture something for sustainability and legacy in this part of the world. And thank you very much, Rhee, for being part of the SOMA Modern Podcast.
Thank you for having me. And let's get outside.
Yes, let's get outside.